latest estimates suggest that as much as 56% of the world's population live in urban areas. This means that almost half of the people on the planet live in communities of less than 50,000 people. From those on islands in the middle of vast oceans to ones nestled deep within mountain ranges, these are the top 15 most isolated villages in the world. Number 15. Edinburgh of the Seven Seas, St. Helena. Located on the island of Tristan da Cunha, which is part of a British overseas territory in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, Edinburgh of the Seven Seas is the most isolated permanently inhabited community on Earth. Amazingly, it's 1,300 miles from the nearest other settlement, which is also in St. Helena, but this makes for an interesting lifestyle for the few hundred inhabitants. It was originally founded in 1816 as a waypoint for transatlantic voyages, as well as a military outpost, and today has a small port, a post office, a church, a school, an official residence for the island's administrator, several red-roofed houses, and a bar. There's one police officer, one teacher, and a 14-member local council that's responsible for overseeing island affairs. It's such a remote place that it takes 2 weeks to get there by boat from South Africa. And in 2020, it was one of the only places on Earth that the COVID-19 pandemic failed to reach. The islanders are virtually self-sufficient, catching all of their food from the surrounding waters, and it's only every few months that a supply ship arrives with things they can't produce locally. This usually works well, but in 1961 the consequences of that way of life became clear. And that year the island's volcano erupted, and everyone had to be evacuated and relocated to the town of Kalga in the UK, many thousands of miles away, and it would be a further 2 years until they were able to return to rebuild the settlement. Number 14. Supai, Arizona. Supai in Arizona is the capital town of the Havasupai Indian Reservation, and it's hidden within a huge rock formation in the Grand Canyon. It's widely regarded as being the most remote community in the contiguous United States, and is surprisingly 8 miles from the nearest road. This means the town has no vehicles, and locals instead use animals to get around. In fact, this is the only place in the US where the Postal Service uses mules to make deliveries. You can only reach Supai by mule, by foot, or by helicopter, and this means that the roughly 200-strong population lives a relatively back-to-basics lifestyle. The school, for example, only offers English and math classes, and almost everyone works the land to provide supplies for the whole community. In recent years, it's also become a popular tourist site for those wanting to see how communities are able to live in the harsh conditions of the region. It's also the perfect stopover for people taking on the hiking routes in the area, where a network of bridges, paths, and campgrounds grant access to some of the most spectacular and untarnished sights you'll find anywhere on Earth. Number 13. Oymyakon, Russia. The town of Oymyakon, which is named after the local river, is in the Sakha Republic of Russia and lies around 19 miles to the northwest of Tomtor in the far east of the country. The only land route to reach it is the notorious Kolmia Highway, which is also known as the Road of Bones because hundreds of thousands of people died during its construction, something that happened as a result of the unforgiving freezing temperatures they had to work in. Oymyakon itself is said to be the coldest permanently inhabited community in the world, with temperatures often plummeting to below -58 degrees Fahrenheit or -50 degrees Celsius. It's not just the fact that the village is so far north that causes this, but the unique geography of the area, whereby 2 huge valleys nearby trap the wind within the town, which chills it more than would otherwise be the case. Still, because of the resources in the surrounding area, Oymyakon once had a population of as many as 2,500 people, with individuals wanting to pursue other opportunities beyond what's available there. However, these numbers have been in constant decline for the past 50 years. Now, there are only around 900 permanent inhabitants. Number 12. Kalga Village, Parvati Valley, India. Sitting at an elevation of around 8,200 feet, or 2,500 meters, in the Parvati Valley, which is in the Himachal Pradesh state of India, Kalga Village is an extremely remote place. There are no natural access routes beyond a hiking trail from a nearby dam. This means that there are very few supplies there apart from the ones that can be sourced locally. Normally home to less than 100 people who earn a living working on the land and selling their produce at the closest market, Kalga also has in recent years become a place where tourists will often visit while on a trek to Kurganga. It's also known for its stunning views across the valley and friendly locals, but the life there is fairly basic, with structures made from wood and very few amenities. Most buildings don't have water or washrooms, for example. If you're looking for a remote place where you can detach yourself from the outside world, though, there's probably no better than Kalga village. Just remember to pack warm clothes, because at this altitude it can get very cold, and there's no electricity or easy way to heat up. Number 11. Coober, Pedy, Australia. Throughout history, people have often moved to remote regions in search of their fortune, such as living in small mountain villages during a gold rush. But the most isolated and extreme example of this is undoubtedly Coober, Pedy, which is around 526 miles to the north of Adelaide, deep within the Australian outback. While the region has long been known to Aboriginal people, the town was founded in 1915 when, in that year, an explorer found an unusually large opal stone. Miners arrived within months to try to find their own, and the place soon became known as the opal capital of the world, thanks to its unusual geography that led to the formation of huge deposits. There are now more than 250,000 mine openings dotted around the area and 70 opal fields. But what's most unusual is the town itself. Due to its location, the temperatures are incredibly hot during most of the year and far beyond the tolerances of normal people. Rather than installing air conditioners, locals instead decided to dig into the earth to build their home. And now the vast majority of dwellings and businesses are fully underground. The town also has a highly unusual golf course, which is usually played on at night with glowing balls to avoid the daytime heat. And that doesn't have a single blade of grass across the 18 holes, so players take a patch of turf with them to tee off from. Number 10. Villa las Estrellas, Antarctica. Antarctica is the most inhospitable continent on Earth because it's covered year-round with a thick sheet of ice. It normally has below freezing temperatures, but this doesn't stop people from living there. There are several settlements in Antarctica, all of which are operated by world governments, but the most remote and unusual of them is known as Villa las Estrellas. There are only 2 civilian settlements on the entire continent, and this is the largest. It's owned and run by Chile as part of a wider military base and has a permanent population of between 80 and 150 people. There are 14 homes and limited services such as a part-time doctor, a small school, and a post office. Everyone who lives there works in a support capacity either to the town or the military base and has to be totally dedicated to their role. Each resident, for example, needs to have their appendix removed before they can go there because of the limited medical facilities, and flights are only available back to Chile every few months. With just 3 computers that offer internet access, it's easy to feel disconnected from the world in the village. But for those who live or visit it, that's all part of the charm. When you're surrounded by such spectacular scenery, it's not as if there's a lack of things to do. Number 9. Adamstown, Pitcairn Islands. The Pitcairn Islands is a chain of 4 volcanic outcrops across several hundred miles in the southern Pacific Ocean, and the only town there, which is also the capital, is called Adamstown. With a population of around 40 people, which is also the entire population of the Pitcairns because the other islands are uninhabited, it's the 3rd smallest capital in the world. The islands themselves had been known to and used by Polynesian sailors for centuries. But the settlement that's there today was originally founded by a group of mutineers from a British exploration ship, the HMS Bounty. The town is named after the group's last survivor, John Adams, who was also the leader for most of his life. Due to its remoteness, it may be a surprise to know that residents have access to televisions, satellite, and the internet, but connection speeds are so slow and costly that the main form of communication is made with ham radios. Visits to the island are rare, although occasional supply ships arrive with food and equipment every few months. And while most residents live in one of the homes and run island life themselves, the main island, called Pitcairn, also has a small prison that was built in 2006 in response to a criminal scandal that 1/3 of the male population were involved in. Number 8. Utqiagvik, Alaska. Previously known as Barrow, but now having reverted to its original name, Utqiagvik is a city in the North Slope borough of Alaska, and is not only the northernmost community in the United States, but one of the most northerly permanently inhabited places in the world. Far to the north of the boundary of the Arctic Circle, and with a population of around 4,200 people, evidence has been found of people living in the area for at least 1,500 years. Historically, the reason why it was important was for hunting the unique Arctic species, but more recently it's become valuable for a different reason: oil.
It was found that Oymyakon lies in the middle of one of the largest known oil fields in the world, and it acts as the perfect place for workers and support staff to live. It's also a popular place for tourists who want to see the midnight sun and to explore the surrounding landscape. But don't expect a town like any other. There are no roads there because of the permafrost, and Oymyakon isn't connected to the rest of the country by a land route. People instead have to fly in and out and take onward connections from Anchorage or Fairbanks. Number 7. Stepantsminda, Georgia. Located within the country of Georgia, Stepantsminda is a small town that's home to around 1,300 people. Named after a monk who originally built an hermitage there, it's built along the banks of the Tarik River, around 98 miles to the north of the country's capital, Tbilisi. While this may not make it sound like Stepantsminda is particularly remote, the sense of isolation you get when you're there comes from the fact that it's surrounded by the Greater Caucasus mountain range, which makes it incredibly difficult to reach, even if you use the main route through the area, the Georgian military road. From the town, it's easy to forget that the outside world exists at all. There's plenty of activities to keep visitors busy, such as mountain climbing, exploring glaciers, and trekking through the nearby valleys. A further surprising thing about Stepantsminda is that it's actually the closest town to one of the border crossings to Russia, which is just 7.5 miles to the north. Found at the midpoint of a tunnel through a mountain, there are hopes that easy access to Russia may one day lead to further development of the town and will ultimately lead it to feeling far less remote. Number 6. Tórshavn, Faroe Islands. The Danish-owned Faroe Islands can be found around 200 miles to the north of Scotland, far into the North Atlantic. And despite having a total population of just over 50,000 people, the island chain is one of the most remote on Earth. Because of their position, which is an ideal resting point for anyone traveling through the North Atlantic, people have lived on the islands for more than 1,000 years. By keeping ancient traditions alive, today's residents are highly self-sufficient. The main town, Tórshavn, has a population of around 20,000 people and is on the largest of the Faroe Islands, which is called Streymoy. The main industry is fishing, which supports almost the entire economy, and with hundreds of miles of ocean in every direction, it certainly feels isolated, but it's also very well connected. The town has a thriving tourist industry, with regular music festivals and sports events that attract people from around the world. And when you're there, it feels like any other Danish town. It just takes an incredibly long time to get there, no matter whether you've traveled by plane or by boat. Number 5. Siwa Oasis, Egypt. Deep within Egypt's western desert, around 348 miles from Cairo and 30 miles from the border with Libya, is a small settlement called the Siwa Oasis. It's one of the most isolated places in the whole country, and its 30,000 residents are completely detached and have their completely unique culture, customs, and language. The oasis itself is within a depression that's up to 62 feet below sea level and is a place of significant historical importance. During the times of the ancient Egyptians, it was called the Oasis of Amun-Ra, and it was there that the prestigious oracle lived, and the associated temple ruins and other structures remain accessible to this day. There is now a road that leads from the oasis to the Mediterranean coast, but this was only built in the 1980s, and before then the only way to reach it was by a multi-day camel trek. The region's main products are dates and olives, which are exported to support the local economy. And in recent decades, it's become a popular tourist destination because of the rich culture and history, as well as the stunning surroundings. Number 4. La Rinconada, Peru. La Rinconada is probably the most extreme town in the world that was originally built by gold miners, and because there's still a large quantity of gold still to be mined, still has a population of around 30,000 people, despite being the highest permanently inhabited place on Earth. It's in Peru in the Andes mountain range at an elevation of 3.2 miles above sea level. As you'd expect, despite being just 14 degrees from the equator, the conditions there are more like those on the coast of Greenland because of the altitude, and it takes something getting used to for new residents who have to adjust. There's no plumbing or sanitation provision in the town, and the low oxygen levels in the air mean that hypoxia-related conditions are common. The biggest risk to locals, though, is that of mercury poisoning, as because virtually everyone's job is related to mining gold, large quantities of that liquid metal are used to refine it. Working practices in the town are also unusual compared to the rest of the world. The mines are owned by a corporation, and workers are hired under the Cachorreo system. This means that they work for 25 days without any payment whatsoever, but
then are allowed to work in the mine for 5 days and keep as much ore as they can carry. This ore may contain gold, but it might not, which means it's quite possible that someone could work for many months on end without any compensation whatsoever. Still, all they need is one big score and they could be set for life. Number 3. Longyearbyen, Norway. The Norwegian town of Longyearbyen is on the Svalbard archipelago in the Arctic Ocean and is the northernmost permanently inhabited settlement in the world. It was first founded in 1906 to support coal mines, and despite being completely destroyed during the Second World War, it was rebuilt to continue mining operations because they've proven to be so profitable. Today, with a population of around 2,300 people, Longyearbyen mainly relies on tourism by visitors wanting to visit the Arctic environment after the coal mines have started to close. But there's also been a renewed fishing industry in recent years as a result of global warming. Fish stocks, which used to live further south, have been fleeing the increasingly warmer waters and are now congregating around the Svalbard archipelago, meaning it's one of the richest cold ocean habitats on Earth. The climate there, both because of the northerly position and because the islands are surrounded by freezing water, means that life isn't exactly easy. Temperatures rarely rise above freezing, and this has led to an unusual rule that you won't find anywhere else. When someone dies, it's illegal for their body to be buried on the island, and they instead have to be returned to the mainland. That's because it's so cold that decomposition doesn't take place, and any buried bodies would be perfectly preserved. Number 2. Magingo Island, Lake Victoria. Despite being one of the most densely populated places on Earth, Magingo Island, which is in Lake Victoria, is also one of the most isolated. The half-acre or 2,000 square meter island is home to around 130 people, and there's been a long-running argument between Kenya and Uganda about which country owns it, not because of the island or its inhabitants, but because of the fish that live in the water around it. It's believed that the island was only first inhabited in the 1990s and had previously been covered in weeds, birds, and snakes, but once these were cleared, it was the perfect place to operate fishing boats from. Of particular interest in the lake waters are the large number of Nile perch, which is one of the most highly sought-after species of fish for local cuisine. Not only is the island fairly isolated in the lake, but visitors aren't exactly welcome due to the lack of space and the fear that they may be trying to cash in on the lucrative fishing industry. Surprisingly, though, islanders have far more available services close to hand to make life more tolerable than you would expect for such a small community, including 4 pubs, a pharmacy, and at least 5 different brothels. Number 1. Palmerston Island, Cook Islands. Palmerston Island is the name given to a series of islets on a coral reef around a lagoon, which is part of the Cook Islands in the Pacific. Despite being part of a larger island chain, Palmerston is 310 miles from the capital city of the Cook Islands, so is itself very isolated from the rest of the world. It was first discovered in 1774 by Captain James Cook, and at that time there was no sign that any humans had ever been there before. From then on, it was administered by the British government, and in 1863 a man called William Marsters, who was a shipbuilder, moved to the island with his 2 Polynesian wives. Later, he met a 3rd wife from another of the Cook Islands, and with all 3, they would have 23 children. His youngest daughter died in 1973, and by this time, it's thought he had as many as 1,000 descendants who lived on Palmerston Island, another island called Tongareva, and in New Zealand. And to this day, all of Palmerston's island residents count him as one of their ancestors, each of which is a part of one of 3 family branches, having descended from one of his 3 wives. Marriage within each branch is prohibited, and the head of each of the 3 families, along with 3 other nominated members, make up the leadership of the island. As you'd expect, a community with what would have historically been seen as unconventional went to lengths to look after themselves and keep separate from the rest of the world. This ethos has remained, and while residents often travel from one island to another, transport networks haven't been established, so it can take days or weeks to reach anywhere else. Watch our binge-watching playlist if you'd like to watch all of our most popular top 15 videos. Grab a drink, grab a snack, and get ready to binge.